Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to our panel session on legal and scientific impacts of COP24 3 years on. I am delighted, and we are delighted to be here and to be invited to speak today. For us, it was a true honor to host you at the global event for our faculty in Katowice back in 2018. And we are so pleased to be here with all of you again. We have a great variety of topics from our experienced speakers. Many of our speakers are from Poland, but we are also delighted to welcome Professor Rajko Knez from Slovenia, bringing a further dimension to our already international discussions today. And each panelist brings a unique background, perspectives, and their own levels of optimism and criticism. But we certainly have one thing in common. For each of us, the climate problem is so important and close to our hearts. Today we have our esteemed international panel. We jointly cover some crucial questions, which I'll introduce a little later. But first, I am honored to invite Dr. Michał Kurtyka, former Minister of Climate and Environment, to speak via video to us. Minister Kurtyka was president of the COP24 Climate Summit in Katowice, during which the Silesia Declaration on Solidarity and Just Transition and the Katowice Rulebook was signed. And the Katowice Rulebook provides, as we know, a roadmap for countries to enact laws and rules based on Paris Agreement. What is important, the first ever executive tool to stimulate more effective activities and cooperation at a regional and international level. Mr. Kurtyka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Very good to have you, and welcome everybody. This time from video, not from Glasgow, but it's an enormous pleasure to see the heritage of COP24 alive. And as I'm deeply convinced that what we did in Katowice is a true enabler for what is going further on. So just let me be very focused on 6 elements, 2 elements of optimism, 2 elements of pessimism, and 2 challenges at the end. Starting with the optimism and what's great news since COP24, this is as I said, what happened during COP, and you mentioned it, 2 elements, 2 enablers. Katowice Rulebook, making the implementation of Paris Agreement truly effective and possible. Without Katowice, there is no Paris. And on the other side, the first day of COP24 in Katowice, adoption of Silesia Solidarity and Just Transition Declaration, an extremely important document setting basis for values which are then guiding climate policy globally, worldwide. And since then, I believe that these 2 elements, Katowice Rulebook and the Declaration on Just Transition and Solidarity, are the founding blocks for progress which has been achieved during last 3 years in terms of advancing the idea of climate neutrality by mid-century, as it has been initiated by European Union, but then joined by US, Japan, Korea, and now many more countries which are saying more or less by mid-century they expect to be climate neutral. And that is an extremely important change. I truly believe that without stating the principles of enabling it, basic it in the law, in the Paris Agreement, in Katowice Rulebook, and in values such as just transition and leaving nobody behind, it would not be possible. So that's the first element of optimism. The second is strangely linked with an enormous catastrophe which happened, which is COVID. But COVID generated a big push in terms of economic recovery. 12% of world's GDP is engaged. and many countries declared that they wish to put this money on the service of climate neutrality. So green recovery has been a leitmotif for many countries. And right now, what we can say is we have the cap and we have the resources. And these are two elements of optimism which are extremely important. Without Katowice, it would not have been possible. Now we have two elements of pessimism and of warning, linked also with COVID. First of all is deepening the divide between developing and developed countries. Already the pledge of $100 billion from Copenhagen is still to be proved, to be done by developed countries. But right now we have an increasing divide related with possibility to cope with COVID-19 pandemic in terms of health, in terms of economic, in terms of social and political ultimately impacts, which are increasingly dividing the world between developed countries, more or less vaccinated, able to bring additional money to develop technologies, and developing countries less vaccinated with less resources, increasing challenges in terms of social and political stability. This is extremely worrying, and I think luckily it will be impacting our years to come in terms of whether yes or not we will have a world which is two-speed, or whether we will be able to advance in a uniform manner. The second element linked with COVID also and with the recovery, which has been extremely bumpy, is the question of energy crisis and skyrocketing energy prices in developed countries between gas, coal, oil, and especially before winter. It will be an extremely important challenge. It is not directly linked with climate change. It is not directly linked with Paris Agreement, but nevertheless, energy prices and their volatility will be impacting also people's ability to progress and to switch to new technologies which will be in line with climate neutrality targets. So energy poverty is a threat, looming threat, which has to be answered. And this is why when I speak of Silesia Declaration on Just Transition and Solidarity, I don't speak just of just transition, which has been traditionally the element linked with labor market, but also with solidarity. And I believe that in the years to come, we will have increasingly to address the issue of solidarity within our societies, between regions, co-dependent, not co-dependent, between better well-off people and less well-off people, between better well-off countries, less well-off countries. This is to be addressed. And in terms of challenges right now, I think that the idea of just transition and more or less going from words to action, from ambition to implementation, needs to be guided by this principle of putting at the heart of the implementation people, and looking with people's eyes on these different challenges with various social groups, economic groups, political groups, geographical groups. And the ideas and two challenges that we are facing is we shall not create green islands, but we should aim for green world, green planet. So it's not the purpose of, let's say, exporting emissions from rich countries to developing countries and then importing CO2 rich products from developing countries to developed countries in an artificial manner, decreasing the emissions from developed countries, but in terms of global CO2 balance, it will have no effect, or the effect will be negative. So that's the first challenge that we are facing. And the second challenge that we will be increasingly facing is this gap between how people perceive climate change and what they are able to or willing to pay for. And let me just, to end my introduction, quote a recent study of in Great Britain. Only 8% of Brits consider that Prime Minister Johnson should stop going on about climate change. So they are very much in favor of putting climate change at the heart of national and international agenda. Yet only 7% say my family and me and other families like me should pay most of the cost for this policy. So we should also be able to close this gap, saying, okay, at the beginning, there will be technologies that we need to develop, there are solutions that we need to develop, and we need to make sure that everybody is on board and that people are aware of the challenges and are willing to join governments on the road to climate neutrality. So two elements of optimism, and I am naturally born optimist. So I believe that we are going in the right direction. But two elements of pessimism needs to be addressed, and the challenges which I believe will make the issue of just transition and implementation of the Paris Agreement through Katowice rulebook, but also through the outcome of COP26 in terms of Article 6, absolutely crucial. This is the way to follow, and thank you very much for inviting me and for hosting this extremely interesting panel. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to us today. It was so crucial, so important, and we know that transition is important but must be just. So thank you so much. And now I'm pleased to invite Professor Alexander Nawrat to speak. Professor Nawrat is the plenipotentiary of Minister of Climate and Environment for activities in research and development and scientific policy. He will discuss research agenda as a tool for just energy and climate transition. And let me just introduce that Professor Nawrat was a chairman of State Council for Environmental Protection. He is the author or co-author of several dozen patent applications, over 170 scientific publications, and he's a reviewer of many renowned foreign journalists. He also represents the Faculty of Environmental and Power Engineering of the Silesia University of Technology. So, dear Professor, over to you.
Thank you very much. May I ask for the presentation? Okay. So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's nice to have the possibility to present some of our works with my boss, who was a former Minister of Climate and Environment. So I will just briefly talk about the research agenda which we prepared in the last years as a tool for climate change in Poland. Next slide, please. So we have to start from some definition, what we understand under the global warming and under the climate change. So after the report for IPCC, the global warming is a long-term increase in the Earth's average temperature. So other words, global warming is the increase in the temperature of the Earth's surface, while the climate change includes both global warming and its effects. Okay, so this is the perception of the changes. Please, next slide. So when we have the definition, okay, so we have to come back. What are the causes of the climate change? So after some sources from NASA, we can see that 95% this is the influence of the human activity on the global warming. And some evidences for this rapid climate change include global temperature rise, ocean warming, and extreme weather events, ocean acidification, and also shrinkage of the ice cap and snow cover. Next slide, please. So we can address some questions. Okay, why we address the climate change? Okay, so when you see on the right side, this is the iceberg, and over the water we see what people see. Usually we have the warmer climate, but this is not the problem. Okay, it will be warmer, but we don't see the real problem which we have to face. Okay, and the real problem is this what we called under the water of this iceberg. It's a dramatic rise of the food prices, increase frequency of extreme weather events. Okay, so we can observe this in the flooding, in extreme tornadoes and other activities, and also in some human problems as a migration of the climate refugees. Next slide, please. So most of it, this is, for example, this pollution. So 20% of European Union pollution exposed to the noise, which is harmful for people, is more than 55 decibels. And also we have to mention that over 7 million people die each year for the air pollution. Next slide, please. And we have such dramatic pictures like this. This is islands of garbage, and we have to solve it. Next slide, please. So I give some simulation for the temperature changes over the years from 1850 till 2015. So you can see on the simulation what we summate the differences in influence from natural. So it's the green line. The observation is the white line, and the red line is a human drivers for it. So you can see dramatically is changing the temperature of the surface, and these are the facts. Okay, so next slide, please. So what can we do with it? We can do the action on the different levels. Okay. We can do the action of the national level, so these national strategies. Then you have some actions on the European Union strategy, so it's a European Green Deal strategy. And also we have a Paris Agreement, so where all the countries agreed with some plans. Next slide, please. So I will talk about the national strategy. We have actually 3 pillars. It's one pillar is the just transition, the second pillar is zero emission energy systems, and the third pillar is good air quality. And in each pillar we pointed some actions which we have to do. For example, for transition, we have changed the coal transition from the coal district which we have in Poland. We have reduced the poverty of the energy, and we have to develop new industries. And so I pointed out, just I will not tell about everything, so please next slide. And we prepare in Poland, this is a government strategy, the Poland Energy Policy 2040. This strategy gives enable technologies area. So this is a 10 pointed of such enabling technologies. And next slide, please. And in this technology, we build this mapping of the competences which we have to do to achieve such a goal, which is in the strategy. Next slide, please. And just coming from this document, like energy policy of Poland, national environmental policy. So this is another document. White paper for industrial development, Polish hydrogen strategy, and national raw material agency policy. We built the national research agenda for the climate transition, and this agenda, research agenda, has 32 research directions. and each direction have a measurable point which we have achieved. Okay, so some examples pointed here in this agenda is, for example, electrolyzer construction, and the measurable point is €4 per kilogram. So we don't need an exact technology which we want to develop, but we concentrate on this, that we have a cost-effective cost effect. Okay. Another example is DAC, the direct air captures technologies, and also is a measurable point. Okay, so next slide, please. So in each agenda, you have to have the form of implementation of this agenda. So we concentrated on technology readiness level. And some of the technologies in our country are ready for commercialization. Some have the potential for application, and some technologies are simply not developed. Okay, so we divided this in 3 different groups. And in each group, we implement the different strategy for supporting finance for developing these technologies. For example, for future technologies, we implement the DARPA and ARPA-E methodology, problem-driven research, where we finance many projects on each stage, and the project compete on each stage with other, and the next phase are coming just on behalf of this. Okay, next slide. So we have in this agenda the research task and also the goals. The interesting is the goals. So we give the short and long time horizon. Okay, so in short time horizon, in 2 years, we want to start half of the topics on the agenda, and in 5 years we want to start all of the topics. So 42 projects. Okay, next one. And to enable some documents that it will live, we have to, because documents can be prepared, but sometimes cannot be applied. Okay, so we invent the steering committee for the agenda, and the steering committee have two members, one the representative of the certain ministry. And also we have other members. So these are the chief and presidents of the agencies which develop the money for support R&D projects. Okay, so this is just briefly about the research agenda which we developed in last year with Minister Kurtyka and other ministerial team, and we hope that we will have a chance to implement it and get the goal. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide.
Thank you so much. You have shown the importance of academic also leadership in driving energy and climate transitions, I can say. So thank you so much. And our next speaker is Professor Rajko Knez, the President of Constitutional Court of Slovenia. I'm honored that Professor agreed to accept my invitation and join our panel. We will see Professor right now. And let me introduce Professor Rajko Knez. Has delivered individual guest lecture all over Europe and has directed a number of European Union projects. He also holds the title of Jean Monnet Professor for lectures and research on European Union law. His works have been cited in opinions of Advocates General of the Court of Justice of European Union. So, the professor, it's a privilege to have you here today, and I give you the floor. We don't do professor. Just a second, because we don't hear you. Could you hold for a moment? We have some technical problems with the voice.
But it seems like it's here.
And here's unmute.
Yeah, he is here.
Could you test your microphone, Professor? because we don't hear you. The professor, this is on in your hand, so you can maybe there is something in microphone on your computer because we cannot hear you. Wow. Okay, we have a proposition. Could you leave for 1 second session and connect Zoom one more time? So we skip to another prelegent and then we go back to professor. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. So now during time we will be waiting for a good connection with Professor Rajko Knez. Ladies and gentlemen, I am now delighted to introduce 3 speakers for our next topic. They have prepared a joint speech about the contribution of the Erasmus Plus program to the European Green Deal. And the first, I just want to introduce is Professor Agnieszka Bielska-Brodziak from the University of Silesia in Silesia. She is a chair of Poland's UNESCO unit in bioethics in Katowice. Joining her is Dr. Anna Budzanowska, former Vice Minister of Higher Education and advisor to the President of Katowice for European Capital of Science. And the final member of this group is Dr. Paweł Poszytek, General Director of the Polish National Agency of the Erasmus Plus program and the European Solidarity Corps. And he coordinates the Council of Europe's program, Country Profile, an expert in the Horizon 2020 program since 2014, author of the Polish edition of the European Language Label Competition, carried out by the Foundation for the Development and the Educational System on behalf of the European Commission. And he is author of many articles on the method of cooperation between science and businesses and language education published in Poland and abroad. And I am delighted to have such outstanding speakers with us today. This brilliant team has decided that Paweł Poszytek will present the joint speech on the contribution of Erasmus Plus program to the European Green Deal. So, dear director, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Magda, but I think that Dr. Budzanowska will say a few words as an introductory speech before the presentation. So.
Okay, so please welcome Dr. Anna Budzanowska.
It was not so easy to decide that who will first will take the place. One moment. Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great pleasure to be with you today. I'm very appreciated to present today and a great moment for us, but also for our children. I have one major consideration today. The climate policy is widely broadcast in television and in internet. Recent days, it became a major policy worldwide. However, it's positive perceived by all stakeholders, especially citizens. I have some doubts here because in Poland, climate policy has run as a dramatically increase the energy prices. This is a fact. The highest prices in history are in this year, and I think that will be in next year. How the citizens perceive, do they understand the objectives, or they are treated as political games? This is a real problem, visible protest, and big consideration. Many groups are asking, why should we bear the cost if we cannot afford it, or we feel are victims of the high carbon economy for the former global geopolitical system. Many social groups are building a very negative image of climate changes. This is not young generation group. This is more 20, 40 plus people. There is a lot of problems and conflict. That's why climate policy must be developed in the involvement as many citizens as possible. Not only the big cities, but smaller ones, the farmers, the villages. This is an extreme example, but this shows one. The centralized construction or structural reforms are always rejected. Public perception, it always the same. And the research brings hard data. The government has imposed something and we have to pay for it. So how we build the new policy? Climate policy is very comprehensive, but very difficult. In Poland, since COP24, Katowice, climate policy and law were a legal framework, were created but in centralized bureaucratic model. But at the same time, the atmosphere is for the deliberation and participation with the citizens because of awareness, because of the knowledge. And I would like to ask Paweł Poszytek to present the database of this atmosphere. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Anna. This is what the whole thing is about here, because what we are going to talk about is a kind of bottom-up approach. So we are not going to talk about here hard legislative solutions. They are obviously important, and many panels, many discussions here are target this. But we would like to say a few words and show you some examples of how local or regional initiatives, especially conducted and realized by young people, how they impact and how they influence local and regional implementation of different kinds of laws and policies, which is very important. So we should act not only from the top to the bottom, but also vice versa to be effective in all these efforts which we are talking here about. So I'm going to tell you about the contribution of Erasmus Plus program into European Green Deal. As you probably know, Erasmus Plus program is a flagship European program for education. It's usually associated with students' exchanges, but actually it's not the whole story about the program. First of all, the program is dedicated to all the institutions, all the educational sectors, all the people, not only those in formal education systems, but also those who are outside those systems. With the funds from Erasmus Plus program, different organizations, different groups of people can realize and implement interesting initiatives, including initiatives connected with environment and environmental issues. So next slide, please. So now, as probably you know, we are entering the new phase of Erasmus Plus program because we are starting the new 7-year financial framework in the European Union, which is 2021 to 2027. And as you can see, there are 4 big transversal priorities for the whole 7-year period, which is coming and which has just started this year. And as you can see, this is inclusion and diversity, digital transformation, participation in democratic life. But what is most important for today's discussion is the priority which targets environment and fight against climate change. This is the priority for the next 7 years of Erasmus Plus program. We call it in short, Green Erasmus Plus. Next slide, please. Okay, and there is some theory behind it, and there are some assumptions. We have 3 assumptions here when we talk about the priority for environment and fight against climate change in Erasmus Plus program. This is that Erasmus Plus program will be a key instrument for building knowledge, skills, and attitudes on climate change and sustainable development, both within the European Union and beyond, because as you probably know, Erasmus Plus program is not only, it's a European program, but actually year by year, it's proliferating practically globally. The next assumption is that the program will increase the number of mobility opportunities in green forward-looking domains, which fosters the development of competences, enhances career prospects, and engages participants in strategic areas for sustainable growth, with special attention to rural development. And the third assumption is that Erasmus Plus program, with mobility as its core, mobility activities are at the heart of Erasmus Plus program activities, should strive for carbon neutrality by promoting sustainable transport modes and more environmentally responsible behavior. Next slide, please. Just to show you the scale, because for some people, they might claim, okay, Erasmus Plus program is only one of several of dozen different initiatives, and what kind of impact can it have? So just to give you a hint, what kind of scale we are talking here about. So only in Poland, which is, well, only one member of dozens of members of the program. So only in Poland, for the last 2 years, from 2019 up till now, we have financed over 500 projects. And as you can see, this is 23.5 million euros spent on these initiatives. These initiatives were realized within different sectors of education, as you can see. Most of them come from school education, 300 projects, then vocational educational training, we have 48 projects, within the youth sector, 140 projects, higher education, 8 projects, and adult education, 25 projects. So this is the scale. If you now add up to this the activities of all the other countries in the program, then you can see how big scale it is. So I claim, I dare say that we are talking here about a little critical mass here. So it's the Erasmus Plus program is no longer in certain areas, is no longer an example of good practice only, with some islands of nice practice, but actually we are talking here about a certain critical mass. Okay, next slide, please. And if you'd like to know what kinds of initiatives or topics are raised during those projects. So for school education, mostly it is promoting environmental awareness and attitudes among pupils and local communities, also including and involving parents. It's creating green labs at schools. It's outdoor education and use of nature elements in integrated learning. Within youth sector, it's building environmental attitudes among young people, promoting zero waste and recycling attitudes among peers and in local communities. In higher education, it's developing new curricula in the field of environmental protection and climate change, building green universities, for example, the use of solar panels and other tools are similar to this. Vocational education and training, implementation of internships in green fields, developing training materials in fields such as recycling and waste management, eco-friendly technologies in construction, sustainable development in agriculture and forestry, green propulsion and photovoltaics. And in adult education, it's accessibility of environmental education for seniors, education on responsible consumption, implementation of environmental standards in the management of adult education organizations. Next slide, please. And now you have one of the examples. This is the example coming from Krakow. Krakow is unfortunately one of the most polluted cities in Poland, and not only in Poland, and probably it tops the list of worst polluted cities in Europe and probably the world as well. And they have a project there. It's called Krakowski Alarm Smogowy. It's a kind of smog alert for Krakow. And they realize different activities because of short time. I'm not going to read all of this. You can see that. It's a simple project raising awareness among among citizens and different people, different social groups in Krakow. But what is most important is that actually the results of this project led to not only to the rise of the awareness among different players or people in the city, but actually it gave rise to the implementation of the new law in the city, and even going beyond, even in the region. So this is this very nice example of bottom-up approach, that we start from some educational activities raising awareness, but actually at the end of the day, we have a change in the legislation on a local or regional level. And as you can see, there are some partners. It's an international project because Erasmus Plus projects are international, so you do not do it unilaterally. You need to have other partners from other countries as well. And this project has got partners from Lithuania, from Hungary, from Spain, from Czech Republic. And this is another example from, this one is from the school education. Again, it's increasing awareness and realizing different activities with pupils from schools. But just in short, it's just teachers and students create a plan to turn the school into a water-friendly environment. And these plans have been handed later on to the local authorities. And again, from very simple local initiatives, it goes up and it feeds into a broader kind of policy on a local or regional level. Okay, and actually that's it. So next slide, please, if you'd like to learn more.
Thank you so much, Ania. Thank you so much, Pablo. Thank you, Agnieszka, for such an interesting presentation. It is in particular important to develop international mobility among students, but also adult researchers, academics, and support ecological education and attitude during not only young generation. And you are right, 50 most polluted cities in Europe, 36 are in Poland. So thank you so much. So now I hope that we have a good connection with Professor Rajko Knez.
I'm here. I hope you can hear me. You can hear me. Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
We can hear you, so it is a privilege, and I'm so happy that I can give you the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm honored that I can speak about some more. It's quite a different topic than what we heard so far. It's more internationally oriented. I would namely like to talk about the judiciary and the role of the judiciary in protection of the environment. Namely, judiciary is usually not in the forefront in this battle as climate change and environmental pollutions. Mostly we talk about the governments, we talk about the executives and the legislator. And this is somehow, of course, originates from check and balances approach, trias politica. Namely, the courts are here more for the review of the legality, about the review of the procedural fairness. They are not so much, I mean, they are having controlling role, not so much about the substance. And the substance is something that is more within the sphere of the government. However, I think that this has changed, that we are witnessing right now for the last couple of years, a growing body of climate cases. I think these are big transformation cases, meaning that courts are striving to coming closer to the content, not only to the procedural issues. And to a certain extent, this development reminds me to 80s, namely only in 80s, or also in 80s in the previous century, the European Court of Justice demanded that environmental protection should be a new policy area at that time. So it was not something that came out from the Commission or from European Parliament, but from the court. And the court was at that time the engine of these changes. These changes then reflected in the change of the European Community Treaty. And of course, because of this change, new policy area, there was a growing body of directives which is still present. However, things are not the same. I think that there are some special characteristics of these judgments that we are witnessing for the last couple of years. Namely, and this is what I wanted to emphasize, namely the reasons because of which, or on these basics grounds on which these decisions were taken, and these decisions were saying actually that the governments are not doing enough, that they have to limit more severely the emissions. Not only the governments, but also the private companies, like case of Shell in the Netherlands. And the basis for these decisions are not so clear. And this is my emphasis today. Namely, the courts are relying very differently to international commitments, also to European Convention on Human Rights, Paris Agreement. They are using also unwritten standards, like unwritten standard of care, due diligence, saying also that the scientific uncertainty is not a reason for authorities or even companies to be relieved of their positive obligation to protect the environment. Very importantly, this is my thought, I see this very importantly, namely that they see these changes as a long-term impact of the emissions, and that because of that also the long-term look into the future is necessary. It's not only a couple of years ahead, but decades ahead, and that there is a certain need of intergenerational solidarity. This is what German Bundesverfassungsgericht said. So future generations will pay a high price, and because of this high price, we have also the previous and the general and the current generations that are causing this high price. They have to take part of this. So what is the message of the courts is that the courts are trying to get closer to the substance, and this not very specific, not very solid legal basis means that the courts has to be creative, brave, inventive. And I think this is because this is my viewpoint is decades of insufficient protection of the environment, and giving also by, of course, the executives and by the parliaments, giving a wrong impression in the past that we can use nature almost unlimited for the sake of the economy, that hedonism is an engine for economy, for the society, etc. For this kind of messages, I think this is now a reply to what was going on for decades. Namely, I think that three things are necessary for grave devastation, even for the catastrophes. We need a vulnerable subject or object, in this case, the environment. Secondly, prevailing public opinion and attitude against this vulnerable subject. And very important, third, support of political support for such behavior of the public. And we know this from the history. And I see that the judiciary would like to change these messages that were given to the public in the past. Now, all these cases, climate cases and cases for future generations, this is not the end. I mean, most of these cases are now pending at the European Court of Human Rights. To my last information, there are 16 cases that are pending there. So something that national courts were starting a couple of years ago is waiting actually for the final point. And I think that this is kind of new era, as I said, as it used to be in 80s. I see this as a new era in which also the judiciary is asking itself what's its role, perhaps not just a role of being a power which is only controlling the other powers, but also giving, making a step forward. And I know, at least for myself, what this step further should be. And I compliment actually these developments by some courts, especially I think that Urgenda case from the Netherlands opened the path for this way of thinking. Also Irish case, Friends of the Earth, one French case, and then of course among the last one, the case of Bundesverfassungsgericht in Germany. It remains to be seen what the European Court of Human Rights, how it will approach. So this is kind of the development that is going on right now. Let me stop here. Thank you for listening.
It's really the essence of what today is all about, putting it also legal and other skills into practice in the field of climate change progress. Thank you so much for this fascinating lecture and that you found time to be with us. Ladies and gentlemen, and now please let me introduce our next speaker, Professor Machi Porowski. Professor is the president of the National Fund for Environment Protection and Water Management. In the 90s, he worked at the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, in Geneva, practicing in the design of cryogenic system of the Large Hadron Collider. And Professor is an honorary member of the International Cryogenic Engineering Committee in Zurich. He cooperates with, among others, with Stanford University, National University of Singapore, Fusion for Energy in Barcelona, and Professor will join us today, as we can see remotely. During his speech, he will explore whether the decarbonization of Polish public sector is a technological challenge or a utopian dream. Professor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. I would like to come back a little bit to engineering and to discuss what the title says. Do we really have the potential for decarbonization, or we just dream about decarbonization and are fully aware that it is just one more utopian dream? Can you give my presentation, or should I share the screen from my computer, how it is organized? Okay, so maybe next slide. Well, if we take a look at emissions, and the emissions are given in a time starting from 1990, so from the collapse of the communist period in Poland and Middle Europe until today. And we have two curves. The first one showing the Polish situation. I would even try to say that it is most probably very representative to East or Middle European situation. So we see that starting from 100%, we are constantly decreasing the emission per unit of our gross national product, gross domestic product in million of USD. So this is a very positive trend. It is much higher and intensive drop than observed for the rest of Europe, where we observed some stagnation for 90s, and now the drop is going with the same derivative as in Poland, but the absolute number is higher. So the first conclusion can be that here in Poland, we are quite well positioned when it comes to the emission per million of GDP. Next slide. If we look at I think it's a little bit different. That something went wrong with this presentation, but it's okay still. When we look at the numbers showing the emission in absolute numbers, it is more or less stable for Poland. So the drop per GDP was the result of increase in GDP. And the line shows the tendency, and it is extrapolated with the Fit for 55 target. So we see the drop that if we start from 2021 and we continue business as usual, so we keep the emission at the present state and we also increase the GDP, we increase the gap between the European target and our position. So it may seem quite impossible to be on the positive growth and at the same time on the negative emission. So that is the question, how to fill this gap and how to make possible to stay in a relative increasing welfare position and at the same time to fulfill the targets of decarbonization. At the first view, it seems really a challenge. Maybe we'll need just a little bit more time, but if you give the next slide, we can think about 4 steps resulting from the Poland energy policy as it was proposed by the Ministry for Climate and Environmental Protection and by Dr. Kurtyka. I think 1 year ago it was approved by the government, this policy, and we may derive some steps like the increase of renewable sources. Later, we have to increase the percentage of cogeneration, gas cogeneration, to be able to balance the system. We'll push the coal power plants to the position that they do not like to be, and the percentage of coal will cease, and it will be very close to 0 in 2040. We have to remember that we start from 80% in our power mix, and we aim to finish with something like 11%. And we'll have to build a system of stable zero carbon sources like nuclear power plants and offshore wind farms. It is really a challenge. Maybe it is not yet a European dream, but we really need to act fast, and we really need to have the access to new technologies. What Professor Navrat has demonstrated, that in parallel to these very ambitious targets, we have to develop a national plan of R&D just to support and just to enable the transition of our power sector, because it is not possible to import all the technologies, because some of them, they do not really exist all over the world. And as our situation is quite unique with, if we compare it to other countries, especially for this very high amount of coal in our energy mix, we really should also be focused on some individual paths to the common target, which is a full decarbonization in the middle of century. Next slide. And we can have some summaries. One is that climate policy like Green Deal, Fit for 55 has become a key element of the European Union's identity. And as such, it is basically immune to any criticism or discussion. So we do not discuss with it, we just follow it. And Poland, despite the almost 80% share of coal in the energy mix, can derive a good plan for the energy transition. It was given in the previous slide 4 basic milestones of this plan. We have to change some paradigms, like the concept of cogeneration, which should not derive just heat, but be able to support the balancing of the electrical system. But also the transition is a big opportunity to develop Polish competencies and build whole branches of industry. But we have to launch a very nationwide R&D program, what was already stressed in the second presentation. And maybe the last slide. Well, as this panel has a little bit academic character, a lot of professors and doctors, so I dared to finish it with a small reflection of zero carbon, zero emissivity. Such concepts are very imprecise, and as a matter of fact, zero emissivity does not exist because it would contradict the second law of thermodynamics. In any technology that is related to energy conversion, either from renewable energy sources or from coal or from nuclear, we emit at least heat. And this heat must somehow be dissipated in the environment. And a normal cooling method is to use water. Of course, we can aim towards dry cooling methods like they do in South Africa. We can dream about limiting the use of water. But I think that what we must be aware is that the access to water can become a limiting factor in the energy transition, and that will require really smart movements because water is something that, especially in Poland, we are not very rich of, and there is no technology without cooling. So even if decarbonization is non-European, non-utopian fully target, zero emission is really utopian, because what we need is a little bit of emission, at least of some heat that we still should be able to dissipate in the environment. So a little bit of optimist, a little bit of a pessimist, and a little bit of challenging task, like Dr. Kurtyka has stressed out in his introductory talk. Thank you very much.
Professor, for sharing your reflection of this essential topic. Thank you. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present the Future Generation Youth Voice. It is essential because the Distinguished Program Committee, and Marcus, I am talking to you, always pays particular attention to young researchers, raising climate awarenesses and environmental education among students and PhD students. This is why I'm delighted that we also have the voice of the young generation in our panel, and I want to present two young researchers who will give a presentation together. This is Kate Budanowska from Warsaw University of Technology and College of Individual Interdisciplinary Studies, University of Silesia, and Mikołaj Strzyja, Master of Science from the AGH University of Technology in Krakow and Art Innovation Ltd. Okay, then Mikołaj, over to you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Could you pull up our presentation?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And what is important, I just forgot because of all this emotion, that they will give a really different perspective on the topics, discussing how to be the craziest thinker and the doer for climate change.
Yes. So good afternoon, I'm Kate.
Hello, I'm Mikołaj.
And today we will show you how youth can start to innovate for our planet. Why crazy thinkers and doers? Well, recently I read a book written by Bill Gates about climate, and one of the sentences that really struck me was, in order to solve these complex problems, we will need the craziest thinkers out there. And that got me thinking how I can become that crazy thinker, and how our generation, so-called the Gen Z, that is entering the labor market, universities and schools, can become those crazy people on Earth to create innovation for our planet. But I also decided to add the craziest doers, because ideas without implementation will not change our reality. To find an answer to this question, we must first understand who is Generation Z. Would you? Yes. So our generation is similar to previous generations in some ways. We actually share some universal goals, such as happiness, fulfillment, appreciation, and security. However, the way we achieve and define these goals is completely different, as we have grown up in an entirely new reality. We were raised by generations of fighters for causes, explorers, and stubborn pioneers who opposed pre-existing norms and theories. All of these amazing people that I'm showing you, and many more, gave us tools which allowed us to better understand our world and showed us values to adhere to. They became our role models, showing us that we need to become unconventional in order to create the change. This unconventionality is what we need to become the craziest innovators for our planet. We will need to use it firstly, firstly, to update the already existing technologies and solutions, and secondly, to create new solutions to problems created by the activities and decisions of the previous generations. So how can Gen Z get there? As I said, we share universal values, but because we were raised by these amazing role models, we began to value new things, such as, individual expression, creativity, unconventionality, and tolerance. From this came the need to create communities based on common cause rather than social status, flexibility in working environment, and desire to achieve the impossible. Having said that, let's see how does it look like in practice in the academic environment.
So nowadays, the academic movement is the key element of any college. So, I'm sorry. So can you hear me? I hope. So in general, a lot of companies like Google, like NASA, SpaceX, Formula One, ABB, or even Red Bull organize a lot of competitions and different activities where students around the world can participate and create something special, some solution or something what is extraordinary in order to win some prizes. So based on my own experience, because right now as was presented, I unfortunately finished my university. So based on my own experience, the knowledge which is gained during these kind of competitions is enormous. So it's great to work on the project which can be put into the real life and tested in the natural and world environment. And most important, working on this kind of project provide know-how, industry know-how for students. And as can be seen in this slide, I decided to present a few competitions which are very close to me, connected with my Master of Science, my discipline of science. So first of all, I would say about CONSAT and Spaceport America. So both of them are organized by NASA, supported by SpaceX, and probably Virgin Galactic, but here I'm not sure for 100%. And the main goal of these competitions are simulate the real life problem of landing on the other planets. The Spaceport America is focused on launching. So the goal of the competition is to create a rocket and put onto the given level, like 30,000 feet, for example. And while CONSAT competition is the opposite situation, where the goal of the student's goal is to create the planetary lander, glider, which after launching in the space will land on the surface and collect data during the landing process. And based on this competition, I personally, I know a lot of people who, for example, won one of this. And right now they are working on SpaceX, they are working on NASA, and they are solving their real life problems, very important problems. The same situation is connected with Formula Student. Formula Student is a very interesting case because this is connected, as can you suspect, this is connected with Formula One World. And Formula Student is a competition where students, the team, is creating the small bolide. And they are going to the real track, like Barcelona circuit, like Hungary circuit, or etc. And they are presenting the bolide, they fighting, of course, not like in Formula One, 20 bolides are in the same track, but separately they are fighting for achieving the best results. And based on these competitions, very often a lot of companies like Mercedes, Red Bull Racing, Williams, or Ferrari, they are searching there the best young engineers, the best students, who in the future will be working with them and will be developing the true race car. So, could I ask for the next slide? Yeah. Oh, sorry, next one, because this was all right. Taking everything into consideration, why I talked about it, mainly because that this situation show how important is give a space for young people, for young engineers, for young master of science. They are learning how to solve the real problems in given industry, and later they are working on real problems in the global perspective. So maybe the same way could be used in order to solve the climate problems. Maybe if more competitions connected with climate problems, if more academics conferences, more academics competitions, more bigger prizes would be offered for students who concentrated on climate problems and taking part in the very difficult competitions, engineering competitions, maybe at the end of the day, we could achieve very global class specialists, great specialists we could obtain crazy thinkers and doers from young students. So at the end, I would like to give next, yes, but at the end, I would like to add that Generation Z is extremely creative. Like we as a young people, we were young when the first iPhones were introduced, were presented. We are spending most of the time using the internet. So moreover, we love to learn because we love to know a lot of things about how does it work, how does it look like in the real life. So the synergy of all of these factors leads to the great results and can bring really amazing people who can really solve these problems. But in my opinion, from my perspective, the most important is provide a space, the cyberspace, real space, where a lot of young people from different disciplines could go and try to solve real life problems in the small scale, and at the end of the day, put it into the real life. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, and your voice is crucial because this is the voice of those who will be living with the effects of climate change and who are so central to the mitigation and adaptation solutions. So thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. We are a little run of time, but because we started a little late, so we are not finished yet. And now for a slight change of the format, we have two movies, incredible movies. So at the first, I am delighted to introduce the movie recorded by Dr. Wojciech Kamieniecki, director of the Polish National Center for Research and Development. Dr. Wojciech Kamieniecki, he's responsible for awarding funds for research projects from all over Poland, and it is international cooperation. He's a great expert and author of number of scientific publications in the field of development strategies, enterprises management. He's an expert on the field of green finance, green enterprise, green public procurement. Dr. Kamieniecki will discuss innovation solutions and public support for environmental protection solutions. Can we play the movie and see Director Dr. Wojciech Kamieniecki. I have mute here. We should mute here. I'm trying. that we have one more movie and wow, it's like